Hey Donnie, can you hear me?
Yeah, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Awesome. Awesome. How's you still in Miami?
I'm in Miami right now, yeah.
Nice. Nice. I know you've been traveling a lot lately. Um so Donnie, I just wanted to at least briefly introduce you to everyone and kind of the work that you've done. You've worked with numerous of, top tier athletes being LeBron James, Dwyane Wade, Chris Paul, and I know there's a slew of others that we could just make a whole list, all day long. And your biggest thing when it comes to working with these athletes is kind of, very, what you've always told to me is as being very foundational, very simplistic in terms of we're focusing on the human body, right? At the end of the day, and the term that we really use a lot is biomechanics. Can you briefly explain what that is or what it means?
Yeah, that's one of the things, biomechanics, and even back then I didn't really understand what it was until somebody told me to really look into it. But bio is biology and mechanics is physics. So what you see mostly nowadays is people using force plates and motion capture systems, and they're taking in data, but there's no biology in what they're doing. So they're just applying mechanics, thinking, oh, if I do some mechanics work on my players or my athletes, then it must be biomechanics because they're biological organisms. And that's not the case. And you don't really learn this until you start to study engineering when they have courses called mechanics of materials, where and then a lot of chemists do it too. I'm sure you did in your chemical engineering.
Yeah.
The guys that do the biggest research now in biomedical materials, they're all chemists.
Hmm.
Because when you get down to that way, and they're putting big money into it, because what they really do is they're looking to make artificial ligaments as a replacement
Yeah.
because there's such a high failure of grafts.
Right.
So these guys they're trying to replace cartilages, they're trying to replace everything in the human body with something artificial to eliminate that problem that we have with them failing. So what they really look into is what it's made of, what its stresses it can handle, where it fails. So even repetitively, because back in the day they used to put plastic hips in for your hip replacement.
Hmm.
Now they're using titanium
Yeah.
because the plastic wears out. There's only so many cycles, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like the coat hanger. You can only bend it so many times before it fails.
Right.
And that was a submaximal failure.
Yeah.
So ligaments have been studied, tendons have studied, bones, skin, everything's been studied
Yeah.
to see where it fails, how it wears out, what its constituents is, down to the molecular level, down to the
Yeah.
cellular level. That's all been done. So what you realize with biomechanics is that's really the essence of biomechanics. How many times can I tug on my ACL before it fails? How many times, what forces do I need to subject my Achilles to before that ruptures? Were
Right.
there any warning signs?
Hmm.
So that's the real essence of biomechanics. It's not gait is not a biomechanics problem. That's just a simple physics problem.
Hmm.
So like, but what's the biology behind it? So
Right.
that's what advanced biomechanics is. That's what you learn when you start going at it from the engineering perspective
Yeah.
instead of just learning how to use force plates and
Right.
EMG.
Yeah. Truly adding, kind of the math, the physics, and the biology, and really understanding how each one affects the other, and vice versa. So, we look at this, and you've had some tremendous success with specific athletes and these top tier athletes that I mentioned earlier. One of them that you're highly noted for on ESPN, Bleacher Report, and then a number of other articles or major news outlets is working with LeBron James, and he was coming off of a back injury, I believe, in 2015. Is that correct?
Yeah,
And
he had back pain for 10 years.
really, wow. And what so there was there ever talk of him potentially going to have surgery for that, or what was the scenario at play?
Um, a lot of that, I wasn't involved with him until after.
Hmm.
So I got a lot of my information secondhand.
Sure.
I was told that two doctors told him he needed surgery.
Interesting.
Um, and then those surgeries were very low success rates.
Hmm.
So, he wanted to explore things, basically explore every alternative.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's how I got with him.
Okay. And then so obviously he doesn't go through surgery, and you're able to work with him, and you were working with him pretty much full time for a number of years. So when we look at a guy like that who's dealing maybe with chronic pain, or just pain that's just kind of like, and these guys think, having worked with some pro athletes, some of these guys think, well, that's just how it is, and they're meant to deal with that. So then how do you approach him in a manner where he can kind of reverse that thinking or change that thinking, and how, get his body to work better?
Yeah, that's a common thing. You have to be willing to be tested.
Mm.
So what I did with him, I trained him for a week,
Yeah.
and then he never gave me any feedback. I trained him for a week. His Mike was there, his trainer for
Yeah.
17 years, 18 years. They were there together. I worked with them for a week, and then they left. Never said a word. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then it was a few weeks later when it hit ESPN that he had an epidural.
Mm.
So everyone was freaking out.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from his people
Mm.
after that, and they said, "Hey, can you come to Cleveland?" And I said, "Why? He's if he's at the point where he needs an epidural." And then they told me, "Oh no, he said he felt significantly better when he was working with you."
Wow.
So then the conversation was, "Okay, what do you think about this? I felt better. Does that mean I can be cured?"
Yeah.
And honestly, you have to say, I don't know,
Yeah.
but you can go under the knife right now, or you could spend the next 2 weeks, like let's go another week
Yeah.
and see if it gets even better. And then we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
And if it fails, it fails.
Right.
So, you have to be willing to be tested like that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like, with your approach, there was never, you didn't want to give those guarantees because you weren't 100% certain. And so, and it's kind of, you're kind of playing it week by week. And basically what you're telling him is, if it gets better, let's go another week. If it gets better, let's go another week. And that's, that approach, um, how tough was that to get across to him, or how, was there a lot of buy-in right away with, how you addressed him?
Yeah, he did. He bought in
Okay.
quick, but because of that first week, and like I said, he never gave me any feedback on that first week.
Sure.
But so when I said, okay, you felt better during that week, I'll come out there, let's do another week.
Yeah.
So we only scheduled a week. And then at the end of that week, he still didn't give me any feedback. I was in my hotel waiting for the Uber to pick me up to come back to Miami.
Yeah.
And then the big boss of all his companies and everything,
Mhm. Yeah.
she showed up.
Mhm.
And she's like, hey, can you stay? And I was like, well, I'm on my way to she's like, no, go back, get your clothes, come back. So he extended. So
Gotcha.
the conversations must have been had like, okay, you
Sure.
tried Donnie again. What did you think?
Yeah.
Like, yep, I got better again. So he bought in pretty quickly.
And what was that approach, for him to, and maybe that, and I know this is a conversation you and I have had before, but what was that approach to helping his back?
Yeah. So in biomechanics, my best analogy, because I worked in automotive engineering,
Yeah.
is using cars, right?
Yeah. Same.
So, if you look at a car and the wheels are crooked,
Mhm.
one tire, the one tire that's off, that tire's gonna wear out quick.
Mhm.
And if it's bad enough, it'll be perfect treads on one side, and then this side will be worn out.
Yeah.
And the temporary fix is, sure, you can keep changing that tire,
Yep.
but until somebody straightens that wheel out and stops the tire from wearing out prematurely, you know, that's the essence of it. I wish people knew how easy it was. The problem is making those connections with the human body is
Mhm.
significantly complex.
Mhm.
But once you understand how that works,
Yeah.
so what you do is you measure the front end alignment. Like,
Yeah.
is the frame crooked? Are the wheels crooked? Is
Right.
it, the wrong tires are on there. You measure all that stuff. You find out something's crooked. You put it back straight, and then the beauty of the human body is it heals.
Yeah.
So when you do the measurements on the skeleton, you measure the joints. You say, okay, this is off. This is crazy off. You put it. You work towards getting it back to where it's supposed to be, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, I feel better. I feel better. I had a guy just recently. He came all the way from Canada.
Yeah.
He's a doctor.
Yeah.
I did assessment on him. I showed him a particular
Hmm.
stretch, and he stood up immediately. He goes, I haven't felt this good in years. He goes, I almost feel euphoric. And the best I can say is there was so much tension on that
Yeah.
muscle that was affecting his back.
Yeah.
Just relieving a tiny bit of tension momentarily, he felt significantly better.
Yeah.
So, but we're talking about significant problems, not just general stretching, like this is a
Sure.
targeted specific stretch that turned out in the numbers. So, that's really it. You tune up the car and normally it runs
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. Like you said, if things are moving the way they should, and will have smoother motion or smoother movement overall. I mean, and then this comes back to the kind of the idea, and this is kind of a conversation that I've had with many people. Instead of looking at the force plate first, or maybe, if we're going to look at force plate, let's look at the force plate, before and after, and let's see how they're moving before and after, taking care of, kind of changing, the axis or changing, the frame, making sure that the frame is functioning the way it is. Because with cars, if the car is running smoothly, it's going to perform better longer term. And that's kind of where I always say, like, the force plate is just one of probably dozens of numbers that should be measured, especially when it comes to how these athletes move at the end of the day. Now, you've had that. Now, would you say it was kind of that same approach when you working with, I know you worked with Dwyane Wade, and he has some knee issues, and then Chris Paul has some hamstring issues. Was it the same scenario, or the same type of scenario, or same type of setup?
Yeah, it's the same thing. You measure the frame, you measure the suspension. A car is a car. There's a difference between a Ferrari and a Ford
Yeah.
Fusion, but um, you know, it's the same thing. The structure's the same. Your shoulders your shoulders can vary in structure or architecture in minor ways, but it's so minor. But the essence is your shoulder works the same as my shoulder.
Hmm.
Everybody's shoulder pretty much works the same. Now there might be some anomalies that went on. There's some slight variations, but in general, it works the same. So it's the same approach for everyone. So, LeBron James comes in, Chris Paul comes in, whoever comes in, you measure the skeleton because all we're concerned about is that part of the skeleton or the back or the shoulder, the hip, it has certain tolerances and it has nice smooth joints. Like
Yeah.
people don't realize, like cartilage is more slipperier than ice on ice, 300 times more.
Wow.
Ice on ice is pretty
Yeah.
slippery. So if you're wearing out your joints, that's a significant amount of friction.
Yeah.
And it's not supposed to be rubbing.
Yeah.
So in essence, okay, I'm just going to stop that from rubbing. What's causing it to rub? Is one muscle too tight? Is one muscle too loose? It's really as simple as that, on the back end. But on the front end, it's a little bit complicated to figure those things out. But and usually people feel it right away. So it's the same approach to almost
So,
everything.
what do you say to these people who say, and I feel like this phrasing is thrown out there a lot. It's like, well, that's your body. That's not the same for my body. Or that's, hey, your body works differently than my body works. What's your thought process, or, what would you say to kind of, in turn to that?
Well, they have a sort of a point, but not really. Like
Yeah.
fundamentally, it works the same.
Yeah.
You have, your ligaments are made up of the same collagen types that mine are made up. There may be a different proportion of type 1 collagen to type 3 collagen in yours than mine, but
Yeah.
that's usually such a minuscule thing. The part that's almost true is there are so many things because you've got so many muscles that are attached to your back. You could have 10 different things in your back causing the same symptoms.
Mm.
So that's kind of the solution isn't the
Yeah.
same, but the fundamental problem is
Yeah.
the same. There's an inappropriate stress somewhere in your body, and
Right.
it has to be removed. Now, which exact thing is causing that? Maybe it's an obvious thing, maybe it's not so
Yeah.
obvious. But fundamentally, it's the same.
Yeah. That's definitely true. And having worked with, as you have worked with thousands of athletes, and I've worked with hundreds of athletes, it's definitely true. A pain at the, you know, front of that knee isn't always going to be caused by the same thing at the end of the day. And so, one of the things that I've talked to a lot of athletes about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just because one solution worked for that type of pain, that doesn't mean it's going to work for the next athlete, because what's causing that pain might be something different.
Yeah, for sure. And if you do the wrong thing, you could make it worse, you
Definitely.
know?
Def- Definitely. So then, if you're so obviously we have a lot of these athletes, LeBron for instance, and I'm sure D Wade and Chris Paul were kind of in the same way as well, where for years they were probably in pain until it got to kind of a breaking point with them. What would you say to maybe younger athletes, younger basketball players, or just younger people in general, when it comes to, hey, I've got this pain, how do I go about taking care of it?
Yeah, that it used to be a lot harder. Nowadays it's getting easier because I'm seeing a lot of 15 and 16-year-olds with knee problems,
Mhm.
back problems, shoulder
Yeah.
problems. That's another story, but
Right.
uh, you know, you, it's hard to convince someone because I've had people come to me, that I've done a consultation on them. They got a bad back or bad knee,
Hmm.
and then they don't believe it, and then they leave, and then they come back, and I see them, and they've had surgery, and they ask me like, "Hey, if I would have come to see you in the first place, would I have still had surgery?" Well, I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's certain things that aren't provable.
Right.
There's things that are likely and unlikely,
Sure.
but you can't really tell that. So it's hard to tell someone, especially a young person, that, hey, I see a movement in you that is been identified medically and biomechanically as a cause of, insert whatever the problem is.
Yeah.
That's a fact. That's a thing.
Yeah.
And if they don't have it, they don't really care.
Yeah. The one I see a lot is when some of these younger athletes are walking, their toes turning outwards, and at the same time that they're walking with their toes pointing outwards, their knees are kind of rotated internally. And so every time they take that step, there's a little bit of internal rotation of the head of that femur on the tibial plateau. And we've talked this about, and explain to me, because I keep explaining to these kids, explain to me why that's such a bad thing.
Yeah. So anytime you're rotating a joint inappropriately and loading it, so if it's supposed to be sitting like this,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this gap in there from the synovial fluid, I can't get the right angle here. There's a gap in there because of the synovial fluid in the meniscus.
Okay.
If every time you go into a knee valgus and you're walking, every step you take where you bend your hip and it goes like this, right? Because it's picture that rotation, it's contacting this side and it's not contacting this side. That's going to rub. And then that's going to weaken the meniscus, it's going to weaken the cartilage. It puts slack in that ligament, right? Because there's the ACL to PCL, the front and
Mm-hmm.
back, and there's the MCL, LCL. So every time you do that, now this ligament is getting stretched and then this one's slack. So now you're losing some stability of your knee.
Yeah.
So if you do, the estimated 1,500 footsteps per mile, and you're running 3 miles during the average basketball
Yeah.
game, and if you're playing, AAU kids, four or
Yeah.
five games a day,
Yeah.
every day, you could be taking thousands of steps of rubbing that cartilage together, rubbing on your meniscus, keeping that tendon slack. And, if they're jumping and it does it and it's hitting every time. Like like just hitting my finger like this, more than 4 or 5 times, I can feel it now.
Yeah.
That's my body saying, "Hey, stop that."
Yeah.
So there's obviously it's triggering the pain receptors. So that these repetitive things over and over, every footstep, every day, 24/7, then, loading it dynamically, that's going to wear out eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of like you said, there's so many things that can, play a role into, or there's so many injuries that can come from that, just from this one scenario, right? And that's so if you're talking to some of these athletes, and unfortunately, there's only two of us, and there's thousands upon thousands of athletes who probably don't have access to quality training to guide them every step of the way. What would be your advice to them, or what do you tell them to maybe help them just be aware of those things, or maybe even be able to fix them on their own to a degree?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a huge battle.
Yeah.
You're fighting against popularity.
Uh-huh.
So what I tell people is when you're getting your information, you don't have to be, for people who misinterpret research papers, I blame them for their scientific illiteracy because they can't read the data. So
Hmm.
that's an issue. But when you're going down to that level where these kids are there, I always tell people judge the trainer that's giving you advice by what they've done, not by what they say.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of these influencers, it's just them working out in their empty gyms. They don't have any success stories per se, where, uh, I had a client with this problem and I resolved
Yeah.
it. And, there should be 10, 20, 30 of those
Yeah.
stories. You know, so what I tell the kids, because I see these kids, kids, you can pretty much beat them to death in the gym and on the
Yeah.
court, right?
Right.
Like, and then they're fine the next day.
Right.
But if you're starting to be younger and now you're coming off the court and you immediately need to go to the trainer and say, "Oh, my knee hurts, I need to ice pack," you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So try to figure out what you're doing. Where are you getting this knee pain? And we had a kid came worked out with me, Chris and Devin once.
Hmm.
He was supposed to be this top number one or two kids in the country. I don't remember
Yeah.
his name, but he came to work out with us because I think that they have the same agency. Their agency
Hmm.
wanted to, yeah, hey, let's work out with the guys, right?
Yeah. Right.
He wouldn't lift with us because he said he couldn't lunge, he couldn't squat, he couldn't deadlift. It all hurt his knee. So I was like, okay, does it hurt when you're on the court? He said, no, only in the weight room. And I gave him that look like, you 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 understand what you just said there? Um, so then afterwards, they went on the court, they were warming up. I pulled him aside and I showed him a few things, and he was mad. He's like, "Oh my God, I just lunged, squatted, and deadlift. I wasn't loading him. I was just kind of showing him." And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's where I feel it. I feel it when I'm lifting."
Hmm.
And I'm not going to go into what he was doing,
Yeah.
but he was having issues. He was getting his issues from the weight room.
Yeah.
So I tell him, look, especially with kids, because they're goofy. I don't even know how scouts do it. I don't look at these kids and be like, oh, that's your next star. They look like baby giraffes to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
they're uncoordinated. I
Mhm.
can't. How do you
Yeah.
know? But I tell them at that level that you should feel better coming from a workout. You shouldn't leave the weight room with your knees hurting or your back hurting. You should feel better from the gym, especially if you're that high level. There's not really any information out there that, I needed to work on LeBron James's vertical leap or he was going to be a shitty basketball player.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just trying to get him out of
Yeah.
pain, show him how to use his body so he can play 5, 10 more years,
Yeah.
and then let him do his thing. He's already LeBron James.
All right.
They're like some of these kids are 15 years old. They're already dunking.
Oh, crazy.
They're so fast. It's ridiculous. They shouldn't be having knee pain.
No.
So someone's got to show them like, hey, when you jump, do this. Maybe they're uncoordinated. Who knows what it is. They don't need to work on their vertical leap. They don't need to squat 400 pounds.
Yeah.
They don't need to be beat to death every day.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I portray to them. Like you should feel better.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's so when you talk about feeling better, general soreness would be okay, or is that not okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine. My feel better is, if you
Joints.
came in this morning, your knee was kind of hurting you,
Hmm.
now your knee should feel better. If your
Yeah.
back was hurting, like say you woke up and on the way to the gym, you're like, my back is killing me, or in the car, like, the workout, the stretches in the workout that you did, you should, within a few minutes of warming up and getting going, you should feel like, hey, okay, I feel good now. All right, let's deadlift.
Yeah.
Tell me a minute your back hurts if we're
Yeah.
deadlifting. And they go, nope, doesn't hurt. And then they get a good workout in, and they leave the gym and they're like, I feel great right now. That's
Yeah.
what it should be every time.
Yeah, it should be. It should be. Uh, and so final question here, Donnie, for you is, and I know this is a question a lot of people want to know. Like when we think about, you talked about a lot of details here. You talked about, how the body works and everything, down to materials, to joints, to, talking about the cartilage, talking about all these different things. So many different details. When we look at details of just being a professional athlete and what you've experienced with what you've worked with and whatnot, what are some of those details that go into being a professional athlete at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's such a behind the scenes of, say, basketball.
Yeah.
So, they've got so many obligations. It's a business. They've got meetings. These guys work probably 14, 15 hours a day. So they don't always get to eat on
Hmm.
time. They don't get to sleep a lot.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize is like after their game ends like 9:30, 10:30, and they're
Yeah.
away, by the time they get showered and do their interviews and then get on a plane, they've got to go to practice somewhere.
Yeah.
And then, they might have a meeting to go with.
Yeah.
They've got to sign 50 basketballs. They got to go see kids. They might get to their next destination at 3 in the morning and they got to go to shoot around at 8 or 9.
Yeah.
So you're never going to get a good night's sleep with them. The workouts are going to change. If they have 4 games in a row, you're going to have to alter your leg day.
Hmm.
If you're getting
Yeah.
veteran athletes, they have issues already. Like, I
Yeah.
don't really have any athletes that came to me that were 100% healthy.
Yeah.
They always came with an issue.
Hmm.
So you also, as their trainer, you're expected to communicate with everybody. You're
Yeah.
going to communicate with the doctors. You're going to communicate with the team PT,
Yeah.
the athletic trainers, the strength coaches.
Hmm.
They might get a different strength coach every day, and they don't know what they're doing. And you're expected to coordinate all that. And it's difficult because you have to balance that. Say, a lot of NBA guys have FAI, right? That's an impingement in their hip. So they can't squat, right? Because if they rotate their femur to a certain degrees in a squat,
Yeah.
and that FAI, that little bony growth on there, that's what rubs on the labrum and creates their frayed labrum.
Yeah.
So you have to know which leg that is. You have to know what degree. So you have to ask the doctor.
Yeah.
And you can't be a jerk and, start pretending you have all this knowledge. You got to be humble
Yeah.
because most doctors don't want to take your phone call. They've got
Nope.
patients waiting.
Right.
So you have to kind of finesse your way through all that. And then it's a business. So if you work for the player and now you've found an issue, you have to be careful. You got to work around it, but you can't talk to the team about it either
Yeah.
because that'll be used against them in a contract negotiation. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
and when we're talking nowadays hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, so you have to be very aware of that all the time. Even in a
Yeah.
gym, if
Yeah.
you're working out in a hotel gym or some of the hotels the NBA use, they're connected to like an Equinox.
Yeah.
So the hotel gym is the hotel.
Oh.
So now you're in there, people are filming you every minute. They've got their phone like this and they're looking over here, but their camera's on. So
Yeah.
if you're doing something that could identify that player's issue that you're trying to work around, and then it gets posted. Now it ends up in a scouting report. It's just, besides just the physical aspect, you've got to be able to talk to everybody, and then you've got to be aware about the business side, and then their sleep habits, their eating habits. You just have to be really careful with everything.
Yeah.
It's not, it's nerve wracking.
I bet it is, and
I don't watch basketball on TV, and I don't go to games.
no, I understand where you're coming from on that one. Well, Donnie, hey, I appreciate you a lot. I appreciate you hopping on here and honestly just giving your wealth of knowledge to our audience here for a solid 30 minutes here. I know a lot. There's a lot to take away from this, so I will be posting this on my page at the very least, and I'll collaborate with you if you want to share with your audience as well.
Yeah,
Because
for
I
sure.
really do believe that the things that you talk about, those are things that shouldn't just be known or be addressed as a professional athlete's trainer or just professional athlete, but they should be applied to all trainers and all people,
Yeah, for
athlete or
sure.
not.
100%.
So, if we go that route with it, I think there's a lot of positive or a much more positive direction that health and fitness can definitely take overall.
Yeah, keep going, buddy. Keep
Awesome.
going.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, take care, Donnie. It was great talking to you, and we'll touch base soon.
Cool. Thanks.
Take care.